Okay, I think it's time we'll get started. So hello, everyone. I am Shaneva Mcreynolds. I am the Illinois advocate for FAMM. Background on me is my passion and my pursuit for sentence and criminal justice reform was or has been fueled by my husband's lengthy and unjust prison sentence. While we were able to get him home a decade early based on previous sentencing reform, he left behind many individuals that are in desperate need of a second chance. With that, we have continued to fight, and I'm honored to be a part of the FAMM family and the legacy of nearly 4 decades of fighting for second chances. So FAMM, for those of you that do not know, is a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to creating a more fair and effective justice system that respects the values of individual accountability and dignity while keeping our communities safe. Our report on Illinois' extreme sentences and today's conversation are born out of our Second Chances agenda, which seeks to create as many mechanisms as possible to give people second chances, to reunite families and reduce mass incarceration. FAMM's Second Chances agenda includes passing second look laws, expanding compassionate release, and more frequent use of executive clemency. I'd like to take this opportunity today to welcome everyone for joining us as we discuss the urgent need for second chances in Illinois and the Illinois sentencing system. I'm honored to introduce Illinois State Representative Carol Ammons. State Representative Carol Ammons is serving her 4th term representing the 103rd District. Representative Ammons is a career activist fighting for equality and justice. She is the first African-American woman elected to the 103rd District and is now the voice and advocate of her constituents in Champaign-Urbana and throughout Illinois. While in office, Representative Ammons has dedicated her time and energy toward helping her district and the state pass monumental legislation. Rep. Ammons has a combined nearly 15 years of service in elected office as the county, city, and at the state levels. As an activist turned lawmaker, Representative Ammons is laser focused on cultivating the crucial relationships between community organizers and the state legislature. She knows that in order to achieve equality, lawmakers and activists must align their goals, policies, and actions. And so, Representative, on behalf of FAMM and our panelists today, I want to thank you for joining us. Welcome you here. And if you could, Rep. Ammons, please speak on the importance of continuing to fight for sentencing reform in Springfield.
Thank you very much for inviting me here this afternoon. There's a few things that I think require us to continue to fight. For those who are joining in this conversation this morning, there are legislative initiatives that are happening in Springfield. Of course, I have the Illinois Parole Illinois bill that really we've done a lot of work on, but we've not made the progress that many of us would like to see. The problem of mandatory minimums is so long and historical. It's difficult for us to put it all into this one piece of legislation or that particular piece of legislation. Because it has multifaceted and many entry points. The greatest part that I think harms the entire society is when you suggest, by way of mandatory minimum sentencing, that a human being has no redemptive power, that our society is so far gone that we have no way to help or rehabilitate a person who may have done something that is against the norms of good conduct in the society. So mandatory minimums are used as a weapon, in essence, against the human being, instead of using a process that rehabilitates the person, right? The society, the family. We utilize these things in our society to cause even more harm, greater and longer sentences, and lengthy stays for families who actually are not physically chatteled. And so the work that we've been doing in the General Assembly to reverse some of what everyone knows is racialized policies, right? They come out of a racial history We know that, yet it is very difficult for us to make the substantial change necessary to address the racialized historical problem that everyone knows exists. And so I tend to not spend a lot of time trying to convince people of the actual historical racialized problem that we all know exists. I have spent most of my time trying to do procedural matters in the legislative process with many of you to at least minimize the impact of the racialized criminal legal system that we know exists. In the United States, we have seen the harmful effects of mandatory minimums all the way through to children growing up their entire childhood without even touching their other parent. That should be unacceptable in a what's called quote unquote civilized society. That should be unacceptable. But because we've taken away judicial discretion by implementing mandatory minimum sentencing, we have allowed our prisons to become just simply holding cells and pens for people that we want to discard in the society. And this is unfortunately something that we have to do, meaning those of us who are on the outside have to fight to remove these racialized policies that we know are tied all the way back to chattel slavery in the United States. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I got a little bit of a cold, like everybody in Illinois, I'm sure, that is working on me. So the mandatory minimum sentences that Congress attached to all of our states in the 80s, driven by the drug war, which we know is the impetus of the mandatory minimum sentencing, those laws have caused great devastation in the lives of people, period. It has cost the taxpayers millions and millions of dollars that really cannot be justified in reality. And it has also caused our criminal legal system to become a churning system to churn out more and more people and to continue the system as it currently exists. So we have prosecutors who would rather utilize this maximum sentence on young people at 16 years old and call a young person at 16 a habitual criminal. So that means that person gets an enhanced sentence based on their laws that will lock them up for almost all of their young adult life with no real remedy to address the trauma that may have caused them to conduct themselves in a way that was outside of good conduct and norms. And so we have an entire system that we have to fight. It's not just whether the judges have the ability to hand down a lesser sentence where it might be appropriate, because mandatory minimums prevent them from doing that in some cases. But we also have a racial disparity that we have to address. And we cannot do that with disinterested peers, with citizens who are not interested and are more shameful that their children are involved in a criminal legal system than to get rid of the stigma and help the child or the young person or even the adult offender to rehabilitate themselves in reality and learn to come back to the community as a full functioning citizen. We don't talk about that in Springfield. We talk about what makes good press pops. We talk about what makes my election easier in so many ways that I can go around and say how great I am. But in reality, we are doing great harm through the policies every single day. And so I'm hoping, and I'm not sure, you tell me, Shaneva, I'm not sure. I have a whole thing of stuff that I could talk about. I could talk about the Parole Illinois bill. I could talk about multiple bills that we are working on in Springfield to try to at least put a dent where the dent needs to be put into the criminal legal system to provide an avenue, just an avenue. And this is something that I think people should understand. As we've been working on the Parole Illinois bill, we are very close, although we have to start over with the new General Assembly, we are very close to getting the prerequisite 60 votes. But the reality is that getting to that 60 has to have a groundswell of people in Illinois demanding a better system. Currently, people who are incarcerated in Illinois, who have been incarcerated for many, many generations now, long sentences, many of them are elders, and they are very ill, and they're suffering beyond anything that can compare. And there's no method, no mechanism to trigger at least a hearing for them to get an opportunity to show that they can live in society without harming themselves or others. That doesn't exist currently in Illinois. And so hopefully through the work that FAMM does and many other organizations that's in coalition with FAMM can raise the level of importance and significance to fever pitch so that we as legislative members cannot ignore the obvious need for reform in the area of parole. This is a huge bill, as you all know, is taking us quite some time. But I think that the state of Illinois and General Assembly, and just simply the costs associated with incarcerating everybody in the darn state is ridiculous. If we want a better society, we're going to have to educate people in order for that society to exist. Currently, we're not doing that. We'd rather spend millions and millions of dollars every single year out of the budget of Illinois to hold people because we don't know or we feel fearful that they cannot join society without harming themselves or others. I think that's a very bad proposition, is bad policy. And for a lot of us who know people who have been incarcerated, in my family and your family, came out of physical abusive relationships, very terrible traumatic experiences. And there's almost no Black community in the state of Illinois who has not been targeted for divestment in the economic space. And so there's no wonder that you have people who are doing things that we would not agree with in our society or harming other people, that we keep hearing all these stories of shootings and all of these things. Where is the psychological help to help these folks so that we don't have a prison system filled with injured people who've just injured someone else? I think we need to start thinking differently about what our criminal legal system does, how it should function, circumstances. There are extenuating circumstances in every single case that I've watched over my career that are not taken into account when a judge is forced to sentence them to a combination of maximum sentences. It's utterly ridiculous. It is not a sustainable system. And unfortunately, we have not done very well in the United States about, turning the car around and deciding to go in a different direction. That becomes a little bit of a challenge for us here. So I'll stop there, Shaneva, and you let me know how you'd like to proceed. Of course, I have legislative initiatives that we could always talk about, and happy to turn back to you for that guidance.
Thank you, Rep. Emmons. I just want to thank you for your transparency and wealth of knowledge for the many panelists that have joined us today, and even the listeners. I appreciate the transparency and just the direct and to the point. And it's a breath of fresh air to know that Springfield has you and others like you that are being extremely transparent with your constituents and your colleagues and your lawmakers. We would welcome you to stay on the call if you have time. I know that you have.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna stay on so that I can hear from the others. I think it's important for us to do a dialogue and exchange on some of these issues.
Thank you for that. And so in April, FAMM released our report entitled Time for Justice, the Urgent Need for Second Chances in the Illinois Sentencing System. The report looked at the state of extreme sentencing in Illinois, which we defined as sentences with expected lengths of stay of 15 years or longer. What we found was a sentencing system in urgent need of reform. The population serving extreme sentences has surged in the recent decades, with 4 times as many people serving life or virtual life sentences in 2020 as there were in 1988. The proportion of the Illinois prison population serving these sentences with expected lengths of stay longer than 15 years more than doubled between 1980 and 2020. These sentencing policies have overwhelmingly impacted Black people in Illinois. Black people make up of 15% of the Illinois population, but 66% of the people serving life sentences, 67% of people with virtual life sentences, and 61% of people with expected lengths of stay of 15 years to 40 years. Those numbers are alarming, I'm sure, for all of us that are on this call. FAMM is thrilled today to be joined by our esteemed panel to help dig further into these issues and talk about what Illinois, particularly the legislature and governor, can do to turn the tide on extreme sentencing in Illinois. So today I'd like to introduce our panelists. Joining us, we have Mr. Renaldo Hudson. He is the Education Director of Illinois Prison Project. Renaldo Hudson is an educator, minister, and community organizer, and focuses his work on ending perpetual punishment in Illinois after being sentenced to death row. Mr. Hudson worked for 37 years while incarcerated in the Illinois Department of Corrections, where he became a leader, educator, and founder. Mr. Hudson developed and implemented groundbreaking programs inside the Department of Correction, including the prison newspaper, Statesville Speaks, and the Building Block Program, a transformational program run by incarcerated people within the Illinois Department of Corrections. Mr. Hudson was released in September of 2020 with Governor Pritzker, when Governor Pritzker commuted his life sentence, and he joined Illinois Prison Project as its Director of Education later that year. We also have on our panel, Mr. Kevin Bloomingberg, lead organizer with Parole, Illinois. Mr. Blumenberg was born and raised on Chicago's South Side and Southeast Side. Kevin Bloomingberg is an unabashed advocate for second chances. He was incarcerated as a juvenile and had to learn to survive in a callous, unfamiliar environment. Mr. Blumenberg spent the next 29 plus years fighting for his freedom and future, earning certificates in anger management, effective decision-making, conflict resolution, and many other courses. Kevin got his high school diploma and began to build on himself and focus on his education, eventually becoming a certified peer educator of public health and assisting in teaching anger management. Today, Mr. Blumenberg is a lead organizer with Parole, Illinois, and a mass liberation fellow with the People's Lobby. Joining these two amazing advocates is Mr. Garien Gatewood, director of the Illinois Justice Project. Mr. Gatewood was named director of the Illinois Justice Project in 2021. Mr. Gatewood joined the Illinois Justice Project in April of 2019. His work focuses on strategies to divert youth and adults from the justice system and to provide support for men and women leaving incarceration and returning to their home communities. He previously was the director of policy advocacy at the Juvenile Justice Initiative, and which is a nonprofit focusing on legislation and policy reform for youth in Illinois. His career in the justice reform field began in 2014 when he worked in Ohio and Kentucky for the Children's Law Center, a nonprofit legal services center protecting the rights of youth. In 2021, Governor Pritzker appointed Mr. Gatewood to the board of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, the state agency charged with developing, evaluating, and coordinating programs for the improvement of public safety for all in the administration of criminal justice. To add to this panel of amazing men, we have to bring in Mrs. Lindsey Hammond. She is Restored Justice's Policy Director. Reverend Lindsey Hammond is is Restored Justice's Policy Director that leads the organization's policy development and advocacy focused on sentencing reform for children and young adults serving extreme sentences. Before joining Restored Justice, Lindsey worked with advocates to end wealth-based detention in Illinois and increase employment and housing opportunities for people with records, including legislation that led to the nation's most expansive ceiling of felony records. Ms. Hammond serves on the Illinois Reentry Council and the planning team for the Illinois Resentencing Task Force. So I'm going to start with ladies first. Ms. Hammond, can you walk us through sentencing in Illinois and what laws the state has on the books that lead to such extreme sentences?
Thank you. And I want to say thank you so much for the warm introduction, for the invitation to be here with this esteemed panel. I'm excited to learn from each of you today and to talk about this important report that FAMM has created. In the 1970s and 1990s, Illinois, like many other states in the federal government, inflicted harsher punishments with the goal of reducing crime. In Illinois, we eliminated parole in 1978. We slashed time off of good behavior in 1998, and we increased base sentences and mandatory minimums. As a result, people convicted of serious crimes served every single day of their sentence in many cases. Illinois' complex web of sentencing policies have led to longer and longer prison stays, yet show little to no evidence of reduced crime or improved public safety. A combination of harsh sentencing laws have driven the massive growth in Illinois' prison population. I'll discuss some of the sentencing laws into 4 buckets: mandatory minimums, sentence enhancements, automatic transfers, and truth in sentencing laws. In the first bucket, Rob Ammons gave us a background on the impact of mandatory minimum sentences, which for a broad array of convictions mandate the shortest prison term a judge is legally able to give someone for a certain crime. Mandatory minimums deprive judges of discretion and the opportunity to make individualized sentencing decisions and take into account the facts of each case, including a person's roles in the offense and their likelihood of rehabilitation. For example, Illinois mandates life without parole for individuals convicted of certain types of murder. For example, if there's one or more victims, or if a specific individual is killed, such as a peace officer, life without parole is mandated. This is regardless of any mitigating factors, the specifics of the crime, or the role the individual played in it. Short of the death penalty, life without parole is the harshest imaginable penalty an individual can receive. Additionally, Illinois' 3 strikes law, or habitual offender law, also mandates life without parole for people who have received a 3rd conviction of certain offenses. Again, this is without consideration of the facts involved in the case. Individuals in Illinois can also be punished for crimes they did not commit, they did not intend to commit, or they may not have even anticipated through Illinois' expansive felony murder and accountability statutes. In the second bucket of Illinois sentencing law, we also need to talk about the impact of harmful penalty enhancements that require judges to tack on, in some cases, decades to an underlying sentence an individual may receive. For example, Illinois has the most severe firearm enhancement policies in the country. For people convicted of certain crimes, if a gun is involved, then additional time must be added on top of the underlying sentence. 15 years must be added if a gun is discharged, but no one is injured. 20 years must be added if a gun is discharged with no injuries. 25 years to life is added if it results in a death or grievous injury, no matter what. To put this in perspective, among states that have mandatory gun enhancements, those enhancements usually range from 1 to 5 years. The third bucket I think we need to address today in terms of sentencing is Illinois' automatic transfer law. This law allows minors as young as 16 to be convicted and sentenced in adult courts for certain crimes. Many people who commit crimes as children serve much longer adult sentences. This is despite brain science showing the brain continues to develop well into the 20s, and that children and young adults are uniquely capable of rehabilitation. The fourth bucket I want to talk about is individuals sentenced in 1998 under Truth in Sentencing. These individuals are required to spend, in some cases, all or most of their sentence in prison. Prior to Truth in Sentencing, individuals could earn up to 50% off their sentence through incentives for good behavior or rehabilitative programming. Now in Illinois, anyone convicted of first-degree murder must serve 100% of their sentence. For most other serious crimes, an individual may serve as much as 85% of his or her sentence and is only granted credit at the discretion of the Department of Corrections. Truth in Sentencing is one of the biggest drivers of long prison stays in Illinois. It also represents a majority of the prison population in Illinois. In addition to these extreme sentencing policies that we experience on the front end of the carceral system, Illinois has very few meaningful opportunities for release on the back end once a person is sentenced. As we mentioned, Illinois abolished parole in 1978 and remains in the minority of states that have eliminated parole. A few narrow paths currently exist that my colleagues on this panel will describe in more detail in a moment, but I'll mention them briefly. One is executive clemency, but that is granted to a small number of individuals, and it's insufficient on its own to address the number of people serving extreme sentences. A new path that was created by the General Assembly this year is the Joe Coleman Medical Release Act. That went into effect to allow terminally ill or medically incapacitated people the opportunity to petition for resentence and for release. Again, this impacts a very narrow number of people. To summarize, for decades, Illinois has pursued a pro-punishment approach to the carceral system. These policies have funneled thousands of people into prison for extreme lengths of time, but has done nothing to make our communities safer.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for educating our listeners on Illinois sentencing and what's led to such harsh and extreme sentences. There seems to be a misconception about people who are serving long sentences that make reform more difficult to achieve. Kevin and Renaldo, having both served extreme sentences and served alongside others who were and perhaps continue to serve extreme sentences, can either or both of you speak about the people who get sentenced to these long sentences and the work that they do while incarcerated, not only on themselves, but for their communities?
I'll yield to you, Kevin.
Yes, I could speak on it. I could speak from personal experience. I got locked up at 16 years old. I didn't come home. I did almost 30 years. I didn't come home until I was like 45, 46. And it just amazes me how studies have now come out that says that your brain is not even fully developed until you're around 25 years old. Yet we've developed the attitude that if you're 16, 17, 18, 19, 25 years old, that you can make a poor decision. And because you made a poor decision at a time, even when your brain is not even fully developed, that you should have to suffer for that for the rest of your life. I don't believe that any of us are beyond being redeemed. And I believe that if we dislike a lot of things that are going on, then it's up to us to try to figure out how do we develop mechanisms that give people the opportunity to show that they can be trusted again, that they have changed. You're not the same person. Any of us are not the same person that we were 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And what's even more ironic is that our Constitution, our founding fathers that wrote the Constitution, they believed in second chance mechanisms. Article 1, Section 11 of the Illinois State Constitution says that the objective is to restore individuals to useful citizenship. In order for that to mean something, we have to have mechanisms set in place that will help to facilitate that. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. And we're not living up to that standard of the Constitution. Anybody who serves more than 20 years in prison, I think 20 years is long enough for an individual to figure out what direction they would like to take their life in. And 20 years is long enough for IDOC to restore you to useful citizenship. Anything we do for 10 years is considered to be a career. And if you've been incarcerated for over 20 years, then I believe that you should have the opportunity to go before a review board to see that whether or not if you should be considered to go home. It doesn't mean that it's mandatory that you're going to go home, but it does mean that you have the opportunity to be reviewed. I think that with that type of mechanism set in place, that second chance mechanism, what it does is it starts to change the attitude of individuals who are incarcerated. When I went in at 16 years old and they told me that I had to do 55 years, I couldn't see that far into the future. And so because I couldn't see that far into the future, I went in there with a negative attitude. I went in there with a survival attitude. and I became hopeless. But as time went on, I realized that, hey, look, this is not how I want to live my life. And that if this is not how I want to live my life, then I need to change the way I think. So I had to take the initiative to save up my money to go back to school to pay for my education. I had to put that work in. I had to go get the certificates. I had to start questioning my own level of thinking about what it was that I was doing wrong and stop trying to rationalize my behavior. And there's
I think we lost audio. I think we may have lost Kevin. Are you guys all still able to hear me?
I think that there are many more people in there that have, put that type of work in, and that they deserve the opportunity to go before this board to see whether or not if they deserve the opportunity to come back home and be a part of society and to build with their family. We make mistakes, we all do, but that doesn't mean that we're beyond being redeemed or changing. I changed from a 16-year-old adolescent who made poor decisions to a man who's out here now fighting to try to change a lot of these systems that have been very harmful towards people in my community. I have prepared myself for everything when I came home, except for the absence or the impact that my absence had on my family. And so we don't look at that. We always say that we want people to come home and be a part of society. We want to make sure that we give people second chances and opportunities, but we're not setting up the mechanisms that will help facilitate those type of things. So I believe that, establishing earned discretionary release and getting that board set back up, that's the first step towards that. And then after that, we have to make sure that we're getting like-minded people like Carol Ammons that believes in giving people these opportunities to see whether or not they change. And then we making sure that we're creating an atmosphere so when they do come home, we're not walking them into a failed system. If we've been doing the same thing for 100 years and we been getting the same results, then that's the definition of insanity. Somebody constantly doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So we need progressive thinkers and people like Mrs. Ammons that are going to come through and say, hey, listen, this is not right. This is wrong. We need to rethink this and go about it a whole different way. So I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. I'm happy to be a part of the solution and moving forward and making sure that we give people the opportunities to come back out here and be a part of their life, and that we're fighting for these second chance mechanisms. It's very important that we do it. Mrs. Shaneva, she went through it. We never talk about how the people on the back end, how our family members suffer as a result of individuals being incarcerated. But she's here and she's fighting for it because she's been impacted by it. And if we want our families to heal, we want our communities to heal, and if we want the individuals returning back home to heal, then we have to change the way that we think and making sure that we're setting up mechanisms that help facilitate what it is that we all desire.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And I appreciate, you amplifying, ownership of the decisions you made and how you recognize that the change started with you from within while working, while incarcerated. One component of Illinois' sentencing system that seems to have greatly contributed to extreme sentences in Illinois is firearm enhancement laws. Garrion, can you speak to the failure of this punitive approach and the alternative policies and programs that we should explore to address the very real issues of gun violence?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you all for having me on this panel today, and I'm so honored to be a part of this discussion. I think when we heard Kevin just speak, he talked a lot about the failures to these punitive approaches. When Kevin highlighted that we've been doing these same things for hundreds of years and expecting a different result. The only thing I would amend to that is the folks who've been in power aren't expecting a different result, right? Like, you've created systems that function off the backs of Black and brown folks, and you're sending them places far away, and you become the economic driving force. Because so many of these things are about economics, right? We'll get into some of the alternative solutions that we have seen, some of the promising things that we've seen, because really, when we look at Illinois right now, we are a few years removed from a 2.5, 3-year budget crisis, a budget impasse. And we are seeing so many of the residual impacts of that now, where you didn't have a safety net for folks, you didn't have services and supports, right? if you rip out human services in communities that have already been ravaged by a lack of economic upward mobility, a lack of opportunity, what is it we're expecting to happen? All right, so I commend the state for a lot of the things that they've done, state advocates, individuals, thinking in particular, one, about the Reimagine Public Safety Act that was an effort led by Senator Peters, Representative Slaughter, and so many other leaders in the Illinois General Assembly. And, the governor and Governor Pritzker and Secretary Hull having a foresight to hire Secretary Hull from the Illinois Department of Human Services to hire Chris Patterson to run the Office of Statewide Violence, Firearm Prevention. So we have issues here in Chicago, but thinking about the entire state, having an office that focuses on firearm and violence prevention by putting $250 million in resources to that. So here's the rub on that piece. You put that amount of resources in, we also have to, at the same time, constantly educate and communicate with others, because assuming that $250 million will solve all of the problems of firearm violence prevention is not a fair one, right? Because again, back to what Kevin said, we've been dealing with a lot of these things for a very long time. So we also have to educate while we build. There are also other, as you mentioned when you did that wonderful introduction. Look, I had to take you everywhere with me to do an introduction. That was outstanding, right? But I serve on the board of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, and we are always having conversations around how to get resources in communities for alternatives, right? There is not, I don't care what side of the aisle you are on, nobody wants to continue to see the levels of violence that we've seen throughout the state, throughout this country, because it's not just a state thing. It's not just a city of Chicago thing. I know that's often sensationalized in the media, often sensationalized in conversations. And 90% of those comments, people don't know what they're talking about. Like, they have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. But if you say it enough times, people start to believe it. So we have to really think about the purposeful disinvestment that we have seen in communities throughout time and time again. We have to offer support for community partners who are trying to find solutions. We have to offer support for government entities and forcing these partners to come together. Cook County led this effort along with the city of Chicago and the state to pull together resources through an equitable lens to actually look at how we can put resources out to different partners across the state. And again, that goes to exposure, right? Because I'm seeing all of these numbers that are available, but if you don't know how to get it, that doesn't matter to you, right? So folks have started taking these steps to teach people how to apply for resources, how to manage resources, because at the end of the day, it's not going to be a one size fits all. But if we have economic opportunities, if we have resources that are there to help people get a better understanding of what is needed in their communities, and it's led by communities, I think we see a turn, right? It's often funny when we hear about, crime in particular areas and there's a focus on particular areas, it would make you believe there isn't crime in other parts of the city and other parts of the state. There is, right? It's just laser focus on communities that look like most of us on this panel. So we have to be open, honest, and transparent about that. And we have to take a collaborative approach. It has not worked with just government. It has not worked with just law enforcement. It hadn't worked with communities without having the support. So how do we pull everybody to the table together and figure out how to get these things done? So I think those are some of the steps that we have to take. I think, again, continuing these resources, right? It can't be a one-time drop in the bucket and they say, go and fix this. That's not how we do anything else in the state. That's not how we do anything else in this country. We have to be committed to preventing violence. We have to be committed to improving conditions in harmful communities and helping people get the resources that they need to survive, to thrive, not even just survive, because we're past surviving. People need to thrive. People need to feel safe. People need to actually be safe instead of feeling safe. We need to be safe. So those are some of the things that I would think about off top. I don't want to go on too long because I know we got to roll. So I'll let you go to Renaldo next.
Thank you for that, Garien. Very powerful and poignant points. I'm going to circle back to you though. So Renaldo, last year, Illinois Prison Project was instrumental in the passage of the Joe Coleman Medical Release Act, which created a medical release mechanism in Illinois, which had previously been one of 2 states without one. How has that mechanism's implementation gone?
Well, I will pause and say that that's something that really need to be studied a little further. And like, I would do a disservice to the attempt to bring dying people home to try to critique it at this moment. I would say to those that are in charge of that effort, please remember that that act was intended to bring people home that need to be home with their families in their dying days in some cases. But I would, if you would bear with me, like to just loop back to something else really quickly, because I'm not an expert on the Joe Coleman Act. I know about it, and I don't want to step out of my lane. But what I do want to say is that one of the things that is really apparent all over this state in the nation is that there's been such a disinvestment in people. And like, we tend to frame this discussion as youth versus elders, right? White versus Black. And it really comes down to economics, right? They disinvested in a community. And so now we have the byproduct, which I will coin mass incarceration. And so we can't act like that it wasn't an investment made in what we're trying to undo. And so I think before we can run too far, that we have to own stuff, right? That we've chosen incarceration over education. And so we see the byproduct. You know, we chose law enforcement over our youth. And so we see our youth acting out. And so I'm a person who advocates for meritless-based release and not meritless-based release, because we have not prepared people and we haven't given the chance. As people talk about rehabilitation, how in the world can you rehabilitate someone who was never habilitated in the first place, right? How can we be talking about second chances when we haven't received a fair chance? And so I understand the language, but I want to push, with all due respect to everyone, the narrative that we're fighting a fight that wants to take the life source from us. And our youth is our life source. Our youth is our future. And if you disinvest in them and you're showing them that you're afraid of them rather than you care for them, what's going to happen? We're going to see acts that are acts, as the representative said, conduct unbecoming of the best of us. And so I was a 19-year-old who was sentenced to death, right? But I had the mental capacity at 19 years old of a 14-year-old. And I was under the influence of PCP and all the different traumas that was flooded over my life. And I'm not an exception to the rule. So many of these young men and women that are suffering right now, that are acting out, they're trying to be heard. I want to say to families that are hurting, please know that my heart cries for you, but we can't throw our kids away. We can't give our kids to a monster and say, fix them. Like, and our system is monstrous. It is not designed to fix anyone. And so I just wanted to just loop back to that really quickly, because I think it's important, because we can lay out our individual pedigrees of all the stuff that we did, but my history of all that I did don't make a difference to dying kids in the streets. It don't make a difference, right, to people that's making decisions. What's making a decision is that we say to our representatives, we say to our prosecutors, hey, give us a fair chance, right? Try to figure out what's going on with us, right? How do we invest in a community that's been so disinvested? Like, we don't have community centers open, you know, but yet we're crying about what are those kids doing? We're putting curfews on our parks, right? Well, we have to do it because it's violence. Like, we have to just reinvest in our people. We have to invest in the people that's doing the work. The people that's doing the work on the ground should be the people receiving the resources to keep doing the work, and not all the top heavy down, right? I'm gonna give you $1 million and then you go hire 2 community activists for $13 an hour. Stop playing with me, right? And so it's so much to this conversation that we can get lost in the weeds, and I don't want to do that. And so I do want to go back to your initial point. I think the Joe Coleman Act, right, medical release, is something that is extremely important. And I think it needs time and mechanisms to work. But I'll tell you something that's really vitally important. Just like we saw the attack on the Prison Review Board and some amazing people that people can disagree with, but the Joe Coleman Act is something that the Prison Review Board have access to and control over. And so if we don't recognize that we need to be paying attention to them weaponizing and making, well, he's a violent offender or she's a violent, no, these are people versus prison. These are people that may have made bad decisions, but they need a chance, right? Aggravating factors never change. Mitigating factors continually change throughout the years. And we have to amplify that. So I just want to say that, and just, once again, I don't want to get too long-winded because I know we have a limited amount of time, but we need to do 12 more of these panels. So
yeah, thank you. And I feel compelled to do that. There's so much wealth amongst you all and so little time. And I thank you and echo your sentiments. I mean, the system we all know on this call is unjust. And unfortunately, once the system does get a hold of our people, it focuses more on warehousing than it does rehabilitating. And so I thank you for that. One of the key findings from our report was that people serving the longest sentences in Illinois' prison system were disproportionately young at the time of their offense. Garrion, can you talk to us about why long sentences are particularly ineffective and problematic for young people, just as Mr. Hudson has, touched on?
And Renaldo did a great job of highlighting it, and Lindsey opened up the door when she talked about automatic transfer earlier, right? There are so many mechanisms that drive young folks into systems. And I would be remiss if we didn't shed light on some of the work that the Department of Juvenile Justice has done to bring their population down, and alternative programs like Illinois, Redeploy Illinois, both on the juvenile and adult side, because people are starting to understand more and more something that's often referred to as basketball sentences, giving someone 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years at the age of 16, 17, 18, 19 years old does what exactly, right? And this is not to belittle the families of the victims and the trauma that was caused, but at what point do you actually intend to rehabilitate folks, right? What systems are you creating? Because we haven't had the strongest reentry system here in Illinois. And I know Renaldo and Kevin will speak a whole lot more direct about that than I will, but we haven't had that strong system of support. So what exactly are we trying to do? If we continue to drive young folks into these systems without giving them support that they need, right? This is a lack of accountability on us as leaders in this generation to give young folks what they need, to give them the support that they desire, and actually find out what it is from them. We can't constantly dictate to people, here are the things you need to do. You can't go to this place at this time. You can't have this freedom. You need to stay in this community. You need to be in this box over here. That doesn't work because we don't box other people in like that. Prior to automatic transfer ending many years ago, there was a report that came out, and I'll find the report and share with you, Shaneva. 60% of the automatic transfers in the state came from one neighborhood. Like, you can't tell me that a policy is effective if you're focusing only on Black kids. You can't tell me you're trying to rehabilitate a community if you're focusing on putting the Black kids in that community in prison. So we have not seen, and it's not even about being progressive, right? I mean, you can talk to either side of the aisle about this. If you tell me it's going to cost me in excess of $50,000 a year to house someone in a prison for 60 years, where's the return on that investment from a fiscal standpoint? Take the fiscal away, but what are we doing here? What are we trying to build? How do we heal? Are we trying to heal? Or are we trying to move forward? I think these are a lot of the questions you asked in the beginning. And I think we get there by having open discussions like these, candid discussions like these with stakeholders who are responsible for making those changes. And we hold these folks accountable because we have not seen a return on investment on things that we are like. If you look at certain budgets, right? Certain law enforcement budgets, certain Department of Corrections budgets. If you told me that my job was, let's say my job was to make FAMM shirts, Shaneva, and let's say I misspelled FAMM, right? Let's say I put PHAYM, right? And it was my job to write FAMM, like you said, and you gave me $1 million to do it, and I keep doing it wrong, and I never improve on that shirt. I'm gonna have to update my LinkedIn profile, right? I'm gonna have to look for a new job.
Certainly.
So we need to start holding others accountable for the promises that they've made to these communities, to society. So we have to start getting a return on our investment, and we have to be able to do it without being attacked for holding folks accountable too, right? People don't like accountability, but we need to get there. So those are some of the things, those are some of my initial thoughts.
And all of you need to look for an invitation to me for round 2 of this. And I think we could even schedule individual panels with each one of you. There's so much information here that is necessary to get out. In the interest of time, you guys have made this so, rich that an hour is almost gone. But Lindsey, I want to circle back to you before I then open the floor up to everyone one last time. Last year, the legislature passed a bill to create a task force on resentencing through the courts. How is that process going, and what do you hope to see come out of that task force?
Thank you for this question. The Illinois Resentencing Task Force was created by the General Assembly last year under the leadership of Representative Kelly Cassidy, Senator Robert Peters, and Representative Justin Slaughter. It results from many years of working to find meaningful opportunities for people to return home. The task force is tasked with studying innovative ways and pathways for people to file resentencing motions, whether that's initiated by an individual who's incarcerated, state's attorneys, the Department of Corrections, or even the judicial process. The task force has a diverse group of 17 members, including law enforcement members and advocates from the criminal legal reform system, and it began meeting earlier this year. I would say the process has been going very well so far. The task force has considered what it means to truly advance the interests of justice. It has looked at an analysis of who is currently incarcerated serving over 20 years. And the analysis made it clear to task force members that if we're going to meaningfully reduce the prison population, resentencing has to include individuals convicted of serious crimes. Most recently, the task force considered the research and the rationale for resentencing. The upcoming meetings will focus on behavioral health and mental health considerations that should be considered for resentencing. It will also look at who should be eligible and what the process should look like in Illinois. I want to make sure to invite everybody who's here today to consider engaging the task force and share some opportunities if you're feeling kind of fired up today to engage in that process. One of the main ways coming up will be in September. There will be public hearings specifically for community members to talk directly with the task force. That'll be September 29th and 30th, and those hearings will be held in Springfield and Chicago. Another opportunity could be the task force meetings. There's public comment available after each meeting, and you can find the notices of that meeting on the SPAC website, which is the Sentence Policy Advisory Council, which is spac.illinois.gov. There's also an email address set up by the task force for individuals to share any insights you would like to with members. The task force, just so you know, plans to finalize its recommendations in December. My hope is that the task force will continue to elevate this call, this urgent need that we're talking about today that is so clear, and that it will also lead to meaningful legislative opportunities to advance meaningful change and create opportunities for our brothers and our sisters to come home.
Thank you for that, Lindsey. And I want to give each of you guys 1 minute, if you can, to basically add any closing remarks, additional closing remarks, and what you and your organizations are working on. So do you have anything else to add, Lindsey?
I would just add on to what I was saying at the very end, please get involved in this process. I know legislators, Rep. Ammons can confirm, really appreciate hearing from constituents about how important this is. So please get involved in any of the organizations represented on this panel to make your voice heard. It's really impactful and makes a difference.
Thank you so much for adding that. Mr. Gatewood, any closing remarks or want to share what Illinois Justice Project has going on?
We have a lot going on, and we try to help as many people as we possibly can. So I think conversations like this go in that direction. I'm honored and privileged to be able to serve on the board of Lindsey and Renaldo's organization. So I'm always going to pump up the Illinois Prison Project and restore justice. So whatever help they need, I think folks should be doing it. Lindsey was right. People should get involved. People should know who their reps and their senators are, because they are doing a job to represent you, and you should know who they are. They don't mind talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for illustrating how great it is to form these coalitions and work together. Mr. Blumenberg, any last words from you and or what's going on with Parole Illinois?
Yes, I'm gonna say two things. Oftentimes our people perish because of lack of knowledge, because they don't know. And we should fault those that know, not those that don't know. The other thing I want to say is that our decisions today can determine our future tomorrows. So it's important that we're making the right decisions. So we're not having conversations 20, 30 years later saying that, hey, we got it wrong. That's why it's so important that we have these conversations and we dialogue and work towards solutions, because we have to get it right. It's obvious what we've been doing in the past has not been working. Two of the things that I'm working on, I'm still working on us getting Senate Bill SB 2333 passed, which is trying to get a fair parole system established in the state of Illinois, since we haven't had one since '78. And the other thing I'm working on is I'm fighting to making sure that we get the Pretrial Fairness Act implemented by 2023, so that anybody that is incarcerated, as long as it's not, if they have murders, certain gun charges, or domestic battery, you don't have to worry about paying cash money bail to get out of jail, unless they pose a significant risk of not coming to court. So these are two things that I'm working on, that I'm fighting hard to get, because I believe that a lot of these systems that we have set in place have been harmful towards our people, and it's time for us to tear these systems down and reimagine justice about what it is that we want to do for the future to heal our people, to heal our communities, and to heal our families. And if any of y'all ever need my assistance with anything that y'all got going on, man, reach out to me, because I'm all about making sure that we provide better guidance for our people and for society as a whole.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. Mr. Hudson, any last words from you?
Yes, I would really like to amplify the fact that the Illinois Prison Project, who I happen to represent as his director of education, I like saying that is so powerful, but we actually have an amazing program, a fellowship of formerly incarcerated people that are our ambassadors. And we love coming out and just sharing the stories of what it looks like to be restored back into society, not rehabilitated, because I think they playing with us with that language, right? But to be restored with the opportunity to not only reflect to representatives, but to the young men and women who need to see the other end of long incarceration. And we want to make sure that not that we say, hey, it's going to be okay, but it's not okay that you go and spend your life in prison, right? And so I definitely want to say to everyone, like, we love coming out. We would show up if you send us the invite. And I also would like to say really clearly that I believe hope has to be a human right and not something inspired from a pulpit. It has to be something that everyone has access to. And when the state of Illinois said that there was nothing redeemable about me, look and see that by the grace and mercy, I'm able to speak to the nation that beauty can come from ashes and hope deferred makes the heart sick. So my closing words would be, let's make hope a human right and not just something that's out of sight.
That's powerful, Renaldo, and very, very hard to come behind. Thank you for that. I want to take a second before I go back to closing points and ask Rep. Ammons to wrap us up. I want to acknowledge Representative LaPointe. For those of you that are not in the chat, Representative LaPointe wants all of the listeners to know that they do love to hear, lawmakers do love to hear from their residents, especially residents in their respective districts. So please build a relationship with your elected officials, and that is from Representative LaPointe. Representative Ammons, would you please give us your last words and anything you'd like to share with the panelists and our listeners?
Thank you, Shaneva, and shout out to Representative LaPointe and Stoneback, who's, Yang Ward, who's on here as well. I just really appreciate the dedication of all of you who've made this your life's work. You know, it is very difficult for us to reimagine a society that is strictly based on penalty and punishment instead of human development and access. We want to change that. And I think that what I've listened to this afternoon really gives me a little bit more encouragement to stay in the fight, because many of us get worn out and we say, oh, I can't make this change, throw our hands up and kind of walk away. I have been here doing this for over 20 years, and my goal is to see massive reduction. As we saw the increase in incarceration in the 1980s, the late 1980s, we want to see a massive reduction of mass incarceration in the 2000s that we're experiencing right now. And we want the state of Illinois to stop spending all of its money on incarceration and put that money towards what we know works. And everybody has demonstrated on this panel, which is imparting knowledge, wisdom, and education to the citizenry so that they can function at a high level. And you don't need cages to lock people up in. And so my goal is to encourage more of my colleagues to put themselves in a space that might be a little uncomfortable, but to put yourself there for the greater good of the entire society. And I think that we can do that. So I am pleased to always be with you, Shaneva, and all of the coalition members here. We got to count to 60, guys. We got to get back to 60 for Parole Illinois to work. And people deserve to have a hearing. And we're going to have to make that happen. So thank you all so much for continuing this work. And always, always, I will make myself available to join you.
Thank you, Reverend Hammond. And that we appreciate you, and we look forward to continue to working with you. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us for the Time for Justice, the urgent need for second chances in the Illinois sentencing system. And we look forward to working with all of you again in the future. Have a good afternoon.